Welcome back. You're watching To The Point. Yesterday, Imran Khan threatened that if Nawaz Sharif didn't resign by 8 p.m. today, he would storm the Prime Minister's office and topple the government. Well, we're half an hour past that deadline, and although the government is still in place, there are serious questions about its stability and its future. Joining me now from Pakistan, the well-known former Chief Minister of Punjab, as well as the Editor-in-Chief of the Friday Times, Najm Sethi, also senior journalist and commentator Murtaza Solanki, and here in India, the South Asia Bureau Chief of the Financial Times, Victor Mallet, and PTI's former correspondent to Pakistan, and now a senior journalist with Mail Today, Razaul Lashkar. Mr. Solanki, since you're in Islamabad, let me start with you. As I said in that introduction, last night Imran Khan had threatened that if Nawaz Sharif doesn't resign by 8 p.m. today, he will storm the Prime Minister's house. It's now 8:30 in your country, half an hour past that deadline. What is the precise situation in Islamabad where you are?
It looks like the maximalist agenda Mr. Khan and Mr. Qadri had set for themselves is coming to an end, because it looks like the government has succeeded in opening a line of communication with Mr. Qadri, who has more supporters on the ground in Islamabad than Mr. Imran Khan, whose crowds are thinning. Now, both leaders have been summoned to Supreme Court of Pakistan tomorrow, and Mr. Khan hinted this evening that whatever Supreme Court decides, he would follow it. He is still sticking on his demand of resignation of Prime Minister Nawaz, but it looks like he's losing the steam, and it looks like that both leaders of Inqilab and Azadi might have to go back home.
Najm Sethi, you have the advantage of being able to watch events in Islamabad from the better perspective of Lahore. You're not caught up in the middle of them. Maybe you therefore have a more deeper perspective on it. Do you believe, in fact, slowly but steadily, this protest is beginning to fizzle out, that Qadri has already bended and withdrawn his protesters and agreed to talks, and that that Imran is at the point of doing the same thing? Do you believe this protest is now ending, or is that an illusion at the moment?
No, it's not an illusion. It's a summation of what has been happening in the last 3 or 4 days. There's no doubt Imran Khan's crowds have thinned. There's no doubt about the fact that he's changed his goalpost several times. There's no doubt about the fact that since this morning, Tahir al-Qadri has been trying to open up or accept lines of communication from the negotiating committee set up by the government. And my sense is that if the Supreme Court has now got into the act, very clearly tomorrow they will have to make a commitment that they will not carry out any unconstitutional methods to try and overthrow a legally elected government. So my sense is that, yes, they want to face, they want an exit strategy, they want to face saving, and maybe the Supreme Court will give it to them.
Now, it's very interesting what you've just heard, that events suggest that the protest is slowly but perhaps steadily fizzling out. Nonetheless, these sort of things can actually build up again, and all it needs is a moment of obstinacy on one man's part or a slip up on the government's part. Are we past the danger point, or are we still hovering in that grey area where things can go wrong without anyone realizing it's happening? Because after all, Imran was supposed to hold new protests in Karachi today. The talks with Qadri have only just begun. We have no idea how they will end. The talks with Imran haven't begun. He says that the Supreme Court will act as guarantor, but we don't know quite what the outcome will be. So are we really out of the danger zone?
Well, you know, I'd just like to look back to January 2013, when Mr. Qadri did virtually, you know, a similar kind of protest. He came, a little distance short of the point where they got to this time, and he virtually shut down Islamabad for almost 4 or 5 days. So, I mean, as you said, this is something that can happen again. I mean, I think we are not past that tipping point. The more dangerous thing for me is that the good work that was done by both the PMLN and the PPP over the last 5 years to strengthen democracy, we might be seeing some of that being undone.
Absolutely. Victor Mallet, before I come to, in fact, what damage this has done to Pakistan's democracy, I want to raise with you this whole question of the army and the role of the army. Earlier today, Reuters reported that the Prime Minister, that's Nawaz Sharif, had sent 2 emissaries to the Army Chief Raheel Sharif, and was in turn reassured that there would be no coup, but the army chief also reportedly demanded that the prime minister must, and I'm quoting, share space with the army. What do you make of that?
Yes, I mean, the army has always played this very influential role, even in what is supposed to be a democratic period in Pakistan's history. And in fact, Nawaz Sharif handed over control of Islamabad to the army from last Friday. So he was already, as it were, in their grasp. What's interesting, I suppose, is that it doesn't look as though the army actually wants to take complete control, but they do seem to want to put pressure on Nawaz Sharif, although it's not entirely clear why. But and of course, there's a lot of suspicions that they are backing Tahrir al-Qadri and not totally unsympathetic now to Imran Khan either.
You know, Najm Sethi, I take it that this report that I'm referring to by Reuters is one that you accept the credibility of. So let me, before I go to my substantive question, ask you very quickly, do you accept the credibility of the Reuters report?
Yes, I do.
In which case, let me put this to you. If you do, has a process begun which will end up with the army eating into the powers of the civilian prime minister and Mr. Nawaz Sharif emerging weaker? He may live to fight another day because the threat from Qadri and Imran Khan is petering out, but he may end up having lost a lot of power and influence to the army, and he may end up therefore a weaker man than he was a month ago.
That's exactly what the military establishment did to Mr. Zardari when he first came to power. They cut him down to size very quickly, and henceforth he became more or less a puppet in their hands. And there was no question of going against their will on most major national security issues, including foreign policy. Much the same has been done now to Nawaz Sharif. His foreign policy initiatives have all been taken away from him. And I dare say his attempt to hold Musharraf responsible for the coup of '99 set the ball rolling against him, and eventually the army has succeeded in bringing him to his knees.
So let me, while you're with me still, put this to you, Najm Sethi. A year ago, or 15 months ago, Nawaz Sharif was a democratic victor. He'd won 190 out of 342 seats. Imran had got just 34. Qadri didn't even contest the elections. Now, Nawaz Sharif is embarrassed by puny political rivals. He suddenly becomes dependent upon the army for his survival. And presumably, if he does survive, he's going to spend much of his time over the next 4 years looking over his shoulder and wondering whether this whole thing will happen again. Is his credibility in the eyes of the Pakistani people as Prime Minister badly damaged?
Yes, it is. In the sense that a lot of people in Pakistan, including people in his own party, did not agree with his position of wanting to try Musharraf. Most people thought that he was needlessly fingering the army and creating difficulties for himself, and that has now been proven beyond a shadow of doubt. My sense is the army really wants him to get on with the economy and governance issues and forget about foreign policy and national security policy and let them handle that.
Mr. Solanki, there's a very interesting end to Najm Sethi's answer that I want to put to you and ask if you agree with it. Has Nawaz Sharif, as a result of the way in which he survives this crisis, ended up losing effective control of India policy, Afghanistan policy, whatever influence he had over the Taliban, whatever influence he has over wider strategic affairs? And also, will he have to make concessions as far as that treason trial of Musharraf goes? On all those four, is Nawaz now losing ground and control?
Well, after this whole saga is over, after Mr. Qadri and Imran Khan go home, I would say that those forces who wanted Nawaz regime to be a weaker, vulnerable, compromised, degraded regime, they will succeed. So I think whoever has written the script of this play has succeeded in, to an extent, reducing Mr. Sharif as the elected mayor of Islamabad.
Okay. Victor Mallet, we're talking about how the army has gained at the cost of Nawaz Sharif. It will be stronger. Nawaz, as the civilian prime minister, will be weaker. But if if the relationship or the understanding with Imran Khan is eventually sorted out by the Supreme Court, will the judges of the court be a second element who gain from this? Once again, are we seeing the court emerge in the role of arbiter over civilian politicians at their expense?
Yes, I mean, I think the role of the courts, the sort of activist role of the courts is quite odd in a way. And we have in some ways seen similar things in India in certain cases where the courts have sort of not just gone about interpreting the law, but almost sort of taken things on their merits and said we need to do something about this. And that seems to be the case quite often in Pakistan. So, yes, I mean, I think this process, it clearly weakens Sharif. And it clearly weakens electoral democracy. What it does to the other institutions like the military and the judiciary is still up for grabs. I mean, I think that the question that Imran Khan and Tahrir al-Qadri have to ask, or have to be asked, is what is their plan if they get Sharif to resign? What do they want? Do they want a new election? Do they want an interim technocratic government? Do they want a quasi-military government? It's not entirely clear, and they've actually changed their tune quite a few times on exactly what it is that they want. And I think a lot of Pakistanis are saying that they've moved too early before enough of the Pakistani people are fed up with the current government.
All I'll add for the benefit of the audience that this evening, literally as we are on air, it doesn't look as if Nawaz's resignation is any longer on the cards. It seems as if Qadri has agreed to talks with Nawaz's people. He's actually pulled his protesters back. Imran has indicated he's willing to start talks, although they haven't started, and he's also said that the Supreme Court will be a guarantor. And it seems to most people as if both Qadri and Imran are backing off. The protests are slowly beginning to fizzle out, but that's still no guarantee they won't revive again tomorrow morning, because there can always be a slip between the cup and the lip. And that's precisely what I want to put to you. So much of the outcome hinges on the role the Supreme Court plays tomorrow. Imran has said quite publicly that he is willing to accept whatever the Supreme Court says. But if the Supreme Court were to come up with a verdict that's not entirely in full support of the Prime Minister, and that's possible, will the Prime Minister accept it? Because then, not only will he be ceding ground to the army on one side, he'll have ended up ceding ground to the Supreme Court on the other.
Well, you know, I mean, the good thing possibly for Mian Nawaz Sharif is that he's believed to have good relations with the judges. You know, and that's something that a lot of people have in fact criticized Mian Nawaz Sharif about.
Well, but the Chief Justice was appointed by him recently.
Well, but again, this is not the activist Supreme Court that under the former Chief Justice who's no longer there, who retired.
Is there no danger that when given an opportunity they could become that?
Well, you know, that danger is always there. It's still there. One can't say that about the Pakistani Supreme Court.
Let me put that same question to you, Najam Sethi. Is there a danger that when the Supreme Court acts as adjudicator tomorrow Thursday, when both Imran and Qadri have been requested to present themselves, and the Supreme Court has to give some sort of resolution of this problem, that it might actually come up with a verdict that's not entirely in the Prime Minister's favor? I'm not talking about unseating the PM, but requiring him to make compromises, requiring him to agree to electoral changes, requiring him to agree to inquiries that may be going beyond what he's willing to accept.
No, let me explain. It's a bit more complex than that. First, the Prime Minister has no say in the appointment of judges of the Supreme Court or the High Court. The judges now, under the new system, appoint themselves. And Nawaz Sharif has had a lot of problems with the Supreme Court. It's not prepared to give up its newly found independence. Many of the appointments that Nawaz Sharif has made have been struck down by the Supreme Court. So he's having a lot of difficulty with the courts, number one. Number two, why are the courts doing this? The courts under Iftikhar Chaudhry first sought to become autonomous from the military. They took the military on the question of missing persons and so on and so forth. And then they took on the executive, which is Asif Zardari's executive, and they haven't let off as far as Nawaz Sharif is concerned. So there is a power struggle. It's not just between the military and the executive, which is led by Nawaz Sharif. It is also a power struggle in which the Supreme Court is involved in trying to become autonomous of the military and of the executive. So there's a three-way issue here. Over and above that, you now have a split in the media. Part of the media is supporting Imran Khan and Tahrir al-Qadri and is quite happy with the idea of a military intervention.
Will you permit me
part of the media?
Will you permit me interruption? You're talking about how the Prime Minister could be caught in a three-way struggle with the army on one side and the court on the other.
Yes.
We've already seen, and you've already confirmed, that the Prime Minister would be ceding power to the army and maybe substantial powers. what about the Prime Minister ending up ceding powers to the Supreme Court? Could he lose out of that side too?
I'm sorry, I've got cut off.
Can you hear me now? No, we've lost Najam. We'll try and get back to Najam Sethi. He's with us with Skype. But let me very quickly put that to you, Mr. Solanki. Is there a danger that the Supreme Court, in trying to bring about some sort of resolution, could end up eating into the Prime Minister's powers, just as the army is eating into his powers on the other side? A quick answer.
Well, I partly agree with Najam Sethi that Supreme Court is exerting itself as an independent institution. So it would not play for either Nawaz Sharif or military. But the chances of Supreme Court becoming an arbiter are very, very low. They would strictly go by the book. They have already been tasked by the Prime Minister to investigate all allegations of electoral fraud by Mr. Imran Khan. So anything short of extra constitutional measures, Supreme Court would stand by that, and I don't think that Supreme Court would impose any decision on Mr. Sharif.
So your opinion and view of the Supreme Court is different to that of Najam Sethi. Najam Sethi did believe that in fact this is a court that has been checking and challenging many of Nawaz Sharif's appointments, thus suggesting that their resolution of this particular crisis may well eat into Nawaz Sharif's powers. You take a very different view. While we still wait for that line to Najam Sethi and Skype to come back, let me take up the bigger picture with you, Victor Mallet. Where does this whole confusion that we've seen over the last few days, teetering literally at times on the brink of anarchy, leave Pakistan democracy? After all, we were so proud, were we not, last year, that the first effective democratic transition had taken place. Now, 15 months later, you're virtually seeing the same politicians quarreling with each other and trying to unseat each other.
That's right, and they're doing it very, very early on in Nawaz Sharif's administration. That I think is what is so surprising. It's true that he hasn't been very effective. He hasn't, for example, got rid of the power cuts, which annoy and oppress so many Pakistanis, especially during the heat of summer. But it was always going to be difficult to do that in a year anyway. And I think a lot of even of Imran Khan's supporters believe that this movement has really come a bit too early to be effective, which is why you're talking about it potentially fizzling out. But I'm afraid what it does underline is that the military continues to play a very dominant role in Pakistani politics. And as one of your speakers was saying just now, there is a lot of play acting going on. There's a lot of sort of theatre and drama that doesn't really get to the core of it. And Pakistan's fundamental problem remains, which is that it's a military-dominated state with a very severe Islamist fundamentalist problem, not just in North Waziristan, where the military are fighting now, but across the whole country.
I can see that Najam Sethi is back with us. While that Skype link lasts, let me go back and ask you to finish the point you were making. You were saying, and I just repeat it for the audience, that you have a fairly activist Supreme Court that has challenged many of the Prime Minister's decisions. He hasn't had an easy time with them. As you said also, the judges aren't appointed by him. You have a different system. They're independent people. Does that therefore lead to the conclusion, or suggest the conclusion, that whatever role the judges play tomorrow in trying to sort out this matter, when both Imran and Qadri have to present themselves to the Supreme Court, they could end up eating into some of the Prime Minister's powers and pushing decisions on him that he may not be entirely comfortable with it?
No, in fact, I think they're going to bail the Prime Minister out. This is what is likely to happen. There are two petitions before the Supreme Court. One is filed by somebody, a lawyer, which says that what Imran and Qadri are doing is unconstitutional. That is one petition. And then the government has asked the Supreme Court to set up a commission of judges to investigate the charges of rigging that Imran has alleged. So tomorrow, my sense is the court is going to ask Imran Khan and Qadri what is the problem as far as their rigging is concerned, and will say, okay, we are setting up the commission, we will investigate, number one. Number two, they are going to say to Imran, the judges are going to say, do not do anything unconstitutional. You are already near the red lines. And we are taking serious note of this. The judges are very conscious that constitutional democracy should be strengthened and is here to stay. They would fear a military intervention as much as the civilian government would.
Very quickly,
therefore,
you're
So therefore, the judges will find a way out for Nawaz Sharif tomorrow.
A way out for Nawaz Sharif, but you're also suggesting that there could be a sort of rap across the knuckles for Imran Khan and Qadri for having got very close to red lines and threatened democracy in Pakistan.
Not necessarily a rap on the knuckles. I think an exit strategy. Given the popularity of Imran Khan, I don't think anybody is going to rap him on the knuckles. And Imran has been on record for actually holding many of the judges of the court in contempt. So, you know, it's going to be a very, very delicate issue. The judges are going to have to satisfy Imran that they will do an investigation that will be honest and independent. And by the end of the day, they will want Imran to accept whatever conclusions they come to.
You know, it's very interesting what we're coming to as a conclusion. Nawaz Sharif bailed out, he will continue, but he will be weaker.
Much weaker.
Imran is accepted now as having established himself as a political hero. He would have effectively reduced the power of the Prime Minister. The army is the great gainer. What then does this mean for Nawaz Sharif's promise of rapprochement with India? I know that Mr. Modi's decision not to carry on the Foreign Secretary talks was anyway a setback, but now that perhaps more and more of his powers are lost to the army, can he at all bring about a rapprochement a year or two down the road with India?
I'll just go back to, again, you know, a little bit of history. Mr. Zardari's, you know, unilateral gesture of not using nuclear weapons created a huge goodwill gesture here. The same thing with Mr. Nawaz Sharif coming for Mr. Modi's swearing. But now that he is potentially become a little weaker, it's going to be very, very difficult for him to make any sort of grand gesture for, you know, improving relations, for taking things forward. He's going to be much more cautious.
Victor Madam, where does this leave Pakistan as a nuclear state? After all, it's clearly now seen to be an unstable civilian government, a growing army, a country that's prone to massive political protests, where thousands, literally tens of thousands, can come out on the streets. Would the West worry about the stability and security of Pakistan's nuclear weapons in the circumstances that are emerging? Or is that just an exaggerated concern, as both Indians and Pakistanis seem to say?
I think they would worry, they do worry, but I don't think it's been greatly affected by the events of the last week or so. I think that's the problem. There's no doubt that the army will have been strengthened by this, but what the army can't do, because it's not in its nature, as it were, is to run the country properly, to run the economy well, and to run society well, which is why they obviously are not keen to be pushed into a position where they actually have to take overt power as opposed to running things behind the scenes, which is where they are at the moment. So I don't think this changes those nuclear dangers which still exist.
Okay.
But I think it again exposes the fact that the military spends a lot of money and keeps the economy on the ropes, but doesn't really have a better idea of how to run the economy than Nawaz Sharif or anybody else.
Najam Sethi, I'm going to ask you a question that in a sense is almost the opposite of what I've been asking you up to now. And because time is running out, I'll also ask you to give me a short answer. We've been talking about Nawaz Sharif as someone who's going to emerge weaker, possibly as one of the losers. But at the end of the day, he's also surviving. And on two earlier occasions when he was Prime Minister, he was actually toppled by military coups. Many people believe that he was coming close to it, but he survived. Does he get any credit for having learned the art of how to accommodate the army? Realizing that, in fact, he needs to survive and fight another day, and it's better to survive weaker than to play for the stakes of being strong and lose out altogether. Does he get credit for that?
Not really. I think the consensus in this opinion is he's badly mishandled this whole thing. He started off on the wrong foot by antagonizing the army. He was dogged, stubborn, didn't listen to anyone. And then when Imran Khan raised the specter of a revolution and the other gentleman joined him, he didn't act fast enough to defuse the situation. In fact, a lot of people think he was impotent and immobilized, and that this is absolutely no way to survive. He will survive, but the others will live to fight another day.
All right, he will survive, but the others will live to fight another day. Very quickly, Mr. Solanki, one of those others is Imran Khan. Is he emerging from this a hero? Even though many believe he may have brought Pakistan's fragile democracy to its knees, but is he still emerging a hero? A quick answer.
I don't think he's emerging as a hero, but I can assure you that he would find a way to justify his retreat, because he still has thousands of committed supporters.
All right.
And he will find a way. In electoral reforms, he would say,
okay,
you know, we have been able to manage this investigation, and
I'm going to
electoral
have to
reforms.
stop you there. We've run out of time, but it's a very interesting conclusion you're giving me. Imran Khan may not be emerging a hero, but he will find a way of justifying his retreat. That is what clever politicians do. They make sure that when they're defeated, they actually present it with a big smile and convince people like us journalists that actually it was a victory. My thanks to all 4 of my guests for joining me. And if you have been, thanks for watching. Goodbye. Good night.